Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Seeds of Liberation, our podcast about faith and justice. I'm Pastor Lindsay Anderson here with my co-pastor, Reverend Michael Johnson. We're so glad that you have stopped by to check us out and to think with us about what's going on out here in the world as regards justice and faith. And we are recording this a week before it will be posted. So you all will have been living with the news that we're about to talk about for a while, but that's all right because we know that racism is timeless. It's always here, and the same shit that keeps coming up. So,
Lord.
So let's get into it and do a little critical reflection because I think there's something that we can learn. Today, we want to talk to you about what is going on in the Olympic trials. My God, with Sha'Carri Richardson, the American sprinter, the beacon of Black girl magic, the awesome, the wonderful, we are fans of Miss Richardson. As many of you, I'm sure, saw in the Olympic trials, Sha'Carri Richardson ran an amazing 100 meter dash, not mile. I can talk sports, it's fine. She had an amazing showing and was just so full of energy and Black excellence and beauty and magic. This beautiful, talented, queer Black actor who showed up with her luminous grandma and had that beautiful moment that was captured in a photograph and just blew the competition out of the water. She's amazing and we love her. And then of course, that win, that shining moment, the institution, the system, racism, white supremacy culture, couldn't allow that to stand for more than a few days. And so the news broke that Miss Richardson had failed a drug test administered by the Olympic Committee, that they had found the presence of marijuana in her system. And because of that, she was to be suspended for 30 days from competition, which cut right into the middle of the Olympics. So there was a question for a while about if she would be suspended from all events or some events. And because of that suspension, they wouldn't say because, but in quick succession after that suspension, the American team, the American track and field team, removed her name from the roster. So now that discovery of marijuana in her system has taken her out of being able to participate in the Olympic Games and started a firestorm of haters and fair weather friends and folks who celebrated one day and the next day had no kind things to say about her, but only judgment. And we really want to talk today about how that all is rooted in racism, is rooted in these oppressive narratives that run through all of our institutions, including and maybe especially the Olympics, but also are embedded in us and rise up in folks who shame and blame and judge, especially around the topic of marijuana use. But even before we get to that, we couldn't hear these reports without just feeling the intense dehumanization of this beautiful Black woman. We know that she's reported that she ingested marijuana on the day that she found out from a news reporter at a press conference, a news reporter informed her that her mother had died, her estranged mother had died. And that was so heavy and weighted and complicated that she was looking for a way to manage that emotion, those emotions, complex emotions, which we all do. Let's be very serious about that, right? And even in that space, right, there's no room in the court of public opinion. There's no room in the Olympic opinion of the Olympic Committee for that human moment, right? Had she gone home instead had a gin and tonic, which is equally legal, has an equal legal claim as marijuana in the state that she was in, right? We wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Oh, Lord.
And the degree with which judgment has come forth is really reflective of the way that we dehumanize and shame women, Black and brown folks, and those who we perceive to be behaving in ways that don't line up with conservative Christian values. I am distressed and also aware of the meteoric rise and celebration of this woman and how equally quickly it was taken away simply because she will not be competing in these Olympic Games. So having all of her value tied to this one moment is dehumanizing on the level that many Black women experience every day. So we need to do a little unpacking and talk about why what is happening to Sha'Carri Richardson is such a mess of racist garbage. There aren't enough words for me to describe it. And also how that sneaky racism shows up in us, or can show up in us and our response to what's happening or what happens to Black women in the spotlight. So Pastor, help us get into it.
Well, oh Lord, I think you did a good job of throwing it out there. It's just an incredible event of injustice. This, as you said so well, beautiful, incredibly talented Black woman, Sha'Carri Richardson, representing the United States, but not being treated like a citizen.
Yep.
It's amazing. It's just another instance of grace, that thing that the church values, that thing that Paul preached about all through the New Testament, that thing that Paul said was sufficient, that God said grace is sufficient, that power is made visible through weakness. Oh Lord. That may be what's in the Bible, but that ain't what we walking and talking out here in the real world. And it's just another instance that shows us the thin line, the slippery slope that people who live on the margins must tread, while white men get all the grace, if Donald Trump has not shown us how much a white man can do and not get arrested, stuff that's killing people. But here's an instance where, marijuana, which could be a segue into, the whole notion of legalization. But marijuana does not even give a boost or an exact that will not, it's not going to help her win the race.
Right.
Why was she suspended?
Right. It's not
Well, what you say, Pastor?
it's not a performance enhancing.
It's not a
purpose of their testing, right?
That's right. Right. The whole notion of juicing, you know, like in Lance Armstrong's case and others who have been gotten for juicing in the past, is because it gives you a boost in your performance,
Right.
as Pastor said so well, performance enhancing drug. But in this case, marijuana can't do that. But you know, we've been arguing, and I know, you know, a lot of conservative Christians don't like for us to argue for the whole legalization. And I'm not even just arguing the legalization of marijuana. I'm legalization of drugs across the board. Because first of all, United States is the only industrialized country in the world that looks at the use of marijuana or drugs as a criminal offense. We have criminalized the use of drugs. And the only country that declared a quote unquote war on drugs, which, as Michelle Alexander said so well in her book, The New Jim Crow, is not a war on drugs per se, church. It's a war on Black and brown bodies.
Yes.
I mean, if it was just white men out in the street getting high, we wouldn't give a rat's butt. I mean, if we gonna be honest about it. And so most countries look at drug addiction and marijuana addiction in the way that it ought to be viewed, and that's as a health issue, a health crisis, a spiritual crisis, therefore. But we're the only one that use drugs to warehouse Black and brown bodies. And so we have become, since 1970, the largest incarcerating body on the face of the earth. And that is incarcerating Black and brown and yellow folk, because it ain't, not that our white siblings don't ingest drugs. Oh, Lord.
Tell the truth.
Let's get this straight, y'all. I mean, white folk ain't in prison because they're not smoking. It's because of the racism in this country and the white supremacy that rules the land. And so, I mean, just to give you an example of this, back in the 20s and 30s, in fact, from 1920 to 1933, our country had a law, we called it the prohibition of alcohol usage. And it immediately made almost 60% of the population what? Criminals. Why? Because everybody drinks, and there were so many of our white siblings that drink and do drink that in 1933 the US decided, you know what, we need to legalize this thing because we locking up too many white folks. And so when we locking up white people, there's something wrong with that. Oh Lord. But as long as it's Black and brown bodies, how many buildings can we build to house them? Let's put all our resources towards spending thousands of dollars a day or a year to house and warehouse Black and brown bodies in prison, because we don't know what to do with y'all Black folks since slavery ended. We don't need you anymore, so we need to get y'all out of the way. So let's figure out. And so we argue that we need to legalize it all, and people who have a problem with addiction need to be gotten to treatment. I mean, some sort of help church. And so we continue to argue for the, the legalization of these controlled substances, because it's just the right thing to do.
Yes, and in spaces like our state, where marijuana has been legalized, we also make an argument that we need to be releasing people who are incarcerated for crime, for things that are now legal, right? We need to be expunging records. We need to be turning over sentences, right? Because now there's a whole bunch of people in prison, Black and brown people in prison, for the very same stuff that young white folks are now getting rich off of.
And 18 other states have legalized it.
Yeah. So we have a move in a direction, but we want to make sure that it's a move for justice and not just for the consumption of something that's now popular with white people, right? And the other thing that we need to attend to around marijuana is not just changing our laws about it, but changing our minds, especially for those of us, for baby boomers and Gen Xers, those of us who grew up. It's not our fault. It's not all our fault. If we grew up in a time where we were socialized with the idea of reefer madness. Y'all know the little video that they made you watch in school about reefer madness, right? If you were socialized in a time of just say no, the war on drugs, right? We need to revisit how we've been trained into thinking about drugs, specifically about marijuana, right? Because what we now know, and when you know better, you do better.
Hopefully.
What we now know is that from the very beginning, there's been a racist narrative, a campaign to delegitimize, to belittle, to shame the culture and practices of Indigenous siblings and of Black and brown people, especially, but not only in North and Central and South America, right? That marijuana we know about and is even in our lexicon because of our Indigenous Native siblings who used it as a sacred tool, right? As part of a ritual life to connect to the divine. Our Indigenous siblings who used it as a healing, a medicine, right? Used it as part of a cultural identity that whiteness then decided to undercut and suppress and take away, because if you take someone's culture, then you take their power, you limit their power, right?
That's right.
So from the beginning, this vilification of marijuana was a way of shaming the cultural practices and the power of Indigenous Native people. And then that got reified in the ways that we talked about the use of marijuana in Rastafarian communities and in Black and brown communities, right? This idea that it's dangerous, that it's criminal, that it's causes madness because these Black and brown folks must be crazy. Let's blame it on the reefer, right? And now we have in this moment all sorts of organizations and medical folks who are coming out and talking to us about the health benefits of CBD, of marijuana, and the byproducts thereof, right? And white folks in the dominant culture act like that's new news, like it's a new discovery, when our Indigenous siblings have been telling us this all along from the beginning, right?
Oh, Lord.
So especially for those of us who were formed in American culture, you know, before the 1990s, 2000s, right? We need to attend to the lies our teachers taught us, right? The lies that society implanted in us that were not for our own protection or health or well-being, but in fact were for the oppression of Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And that could be a whole other podcast episode, but it's something that some of us need to start thinking about and recognizing and taking apart within ourselves when we have these conversations. And that leads us to our second point.
Oh Lord, keep going, sister.
Our second point. So
You're
we had a minute on marijuana. Let's just turn for a minute to the Olympics. And I'm so sorry if this is about to hurt some people's feelings, because we all love watching those opening ceremonies. But friends, the Olympics trying to act as an arbiter of morality, trying to impose a moral standard, is just absolutely preposterous. Absolutely ridiculous. We need to be honest and talk about how the Olympic Games are responsible every 4 years, every 2 years, however the cycle goes with the Summer and Winter Olympics, right, are responsible for the displacement of thousands of people, for removing people who are houseless from urban centers, scattering them in places where they don't have support networks, taking people from their longtime residences and getting rid of those houses so we can build stadiums, right? The Olympics show up every so many years, and they harm great amounts of people in their own city, in this host city. And this is true in every place that the Olympics has gone. This is true when it came to the US, to Salt Lake City, to Atlanta. It's true in Tokyo. It's true all over the place, right? The impact on vulnerable people in those cities is devastating. Is devastating for the purpose of making money and entertainment. So the idea that the Olympics would legislate morality.
My.
Let's look at your own budget. Let's look at your own development Olympic committee. Let's look at the way you're running things, please. Not to mention that the whole proposition of having Olympic Games in this moment where the pandemic is still devastating the world is highly questionable, highly questionable. Also, not to mention the way that the Olympics has been a platform throughout history for terrible ideas, racist ideas. Pastor, you were talking earlier about the Olympic Games that were held in Germany during Hitler's reign, made famous in our knowing by
Jesse Owens.
Thank you, Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens, who went and competed. We sent that brother over there into the lion's den, into a society that said Aryan people are superior, and so they'll win all the Olympic Games, right? And we were like, go do your best, make us proud, right? I mean, the Olympics has platformed terrible, terrible ideas, terrible uses of privilege, a immoral valuing of money over the lives of community. And I know that's breaking some of y'all's hearts, because who doesn't love to watch a high diving competition or synchronized swimming? Yes, we all love it. However, We got to be real about what the Olympic Games really is, and the price that we are willing to allow people to pay for our entertainment, and for the lie that the world is somehow coming together in harmony and brotherhood, right?
Oh my, oh my.
So
Well,
I'm just saying, and they want to shame and dock this sister for smoking a joint, for eating a gummy. I need a gummy just talking about the evil of the Olympics. Damn, y'all.
oh Lord. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. And then, it's amazing. I mean, back in the day, y'all knew Michael Phelps was, a big marijuana smoker. And
Thank
I
you.
mean, somehow his suspensions always happened when he didn't need to compete. And then, they would suspend him, but then he would miraculously be eligible right at the time when it was time to get his gold medals. Y'all remember Ryan Lochte and all his, him going down to a foreign country, getting drunk, and then filing a false
Yeah, in Rio de Janeiro. Yep.
Rio de Janeiro, where he supposedly got attacked, and come to find out he attacked somebody. But he's a white man, so it's okay.
Right.
And then, just the pastor's point about the moral ineptitude of the Olympic Games should not be shocking. I mean, the idea of the Olympic Games is laudable, to gather all the nations of the world together. But this ain't the first time we've seen a laudable idea not reached. What about that thing called the Constitution of the United States, where racist slave owners wrote words like, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all rich, straight white men." Oh, I'm sorry, that ain't what it said.
That's just what it meant.
Oh, that white men who own land. Oh, okay. Something like that, are created equal. And so the idea of this thing, this experiment that we call the so-called United States, is very lofty as well. And we have yet to reach it. I mean, we have yet to live in a society that treats everybody equal, that moves those who are on the margins to the center, and move the rich folk who are the most powerful to the margins, and they should want to go there to move those who are less fortunate to the middle, in the land of the free and the home of the brave. But anyway, now I'm preaching. Y'all tune in Sunday for the sermon, but we're going. And so, church, what I mean, we brought up a lot of central themes, but biblically, I mean, let's look at the Gospel of Mark, the oldest gospel, in the 7th chapter in my Bible, in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. The heading says, "The tradition, O Lord, of the elders." In 7, the elders reminds me of what Pastor was saying about us old baby boomers. Hey, I resemble that remark. But in the 7th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, right there in the 14th verse, it reads thusly, and we're talking about what's clean and what's unclean, which I think kind of gets to what we're saying here. It says, "Then he called the crowd again and said to them," all right, now we're talking about Jesus, the Savior of the world, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile, O Lord. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, the disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, "Then do you also fail to understand? Do you not see whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but, O Lord, the stomach, and goes out into the sewer?
Mm.
Thus he declared all foods clean, O Lord." And he said, "It is what comes out of a person that defiles. For it is from within the human heart that evil intentions come," church. My Lord. I mean, and as we are in this moment with our sister Sha'Carri Richardson, um, she's being vilified and tortured and taken off this public platform that she is about to shine in, and we're worried about what she ingested, what she smoked.
Yep.
When what's really incredible is what's being spewed about her, what's being said. In other words, going with the word of God from Christ Jesus, Jesus is saying it's what comes out of you, what you say, that can lift up or bring down, that can denigrate or connect us one to another, church. And so we should be concerned about why this sister needed to smoke a joint or whatever it was that she smoked, because there was not enough community around her to help her. She had just, as Pastor said, lost her mom. I mean, and she's a young lady. I mean, she's a lady, she's a woman, she's a grown woman, but she's a young lady from our community. Nothing was said about her pain. Nothing was said about what she's going through and what she has to endure. Only criticism, because she's Black, she's queer, she doesn't look the way we think somebody should look in our society. Again, going with the outward instead of the inward in the heart, what's coming from the heart. And so Jesus does an incredible job of describing real purity. Declaring, he just rewrote half of the Pentateuch. Of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, when we're talking about it, and we get in trouble when we talk about purity or holiness without justice.
Right.
Without justice, the two have to be brought together, church. Not one without the other. And so here's a case that the Bible is clear on what is pure, that we need to be about the business of using words not to destroy each other, but to lift up one another, to celebrate, is the word that Pastor used earlier about this young lady, instead of using them to bring her down and bring her low. Oh Lord, church.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know, just a biblical interpretation secret of the trick of the trade, right?
Help us, sister.
Whenever we see Jesus addressing this idea of clean and unclean or defiled, right? Really, those are labels in his community that are being misused, misappropriated to talk about insiders and outsiders, right? Folks who we think of as us and folks who we think of as them, right?
That's right.
So Jesus is redefining all of this to say, what you ingest doesn't disqualify you from being our sibling, from being God's child, from being a worthy and important and valuable member of this community. So let's stop talking about that as a means by which we separate ourselves. What really separates us is this judgment, is this hate speech, is this systemic pushing out of other people. And that's what we need to attend to. So we
From the heart.
right, what's coming out of your heart that's separating you one from another. And so we want to keep that frame in our mind, because often we'll talk to people who will say, well, I don't see race ever talked about in the Bible. But systemic oppression is everywhere in the Holy Writ, right?
That's
So,
right.
the same thing is happening, right? When we allow racism to to hijack our theology, to hijack our belief, and tell us that those people are different from us. Those folks are not worthy of being with us. Those folks don't get celebrated. We do, right?
Oh Lord.
So we thank God and continue to be compelled by the stories of Jesus, because the stories of Jesus help us to deconstruct, to take apart that bad training that we all received. That is what's driving us when we tweet something ugly about Sha'Carri Richardson, when we, cheer on an Olympic committee that has decided to impose a false moral standard, right? And so we hope that you will continue to join us in cheering for Sha'Carri. Send her some love mail, tell her she's awesome, or just put that out into the world. Send out those vibes of celebration for her and the amazing, beautiful, wonderful Black women that look like her in your community. But most of all, we hope that you will continue on this journey with us as we unlearn the narratives of oppression and racism, as we unlearn those things that try to make us ashamed or separated, and as we keep moving towards justice and love. And we will see you out there, and we will see you next time on Seeds of Liberation.
Amen.